I'm just going to take the liberty again of drawing together what I think are three, I'm not going to say key, because there was an awful lot of really interesting stuff in that talk, Gerald, but interesting things to me. First of all, community as a diversely employed signifier. I think that's really powerful. There's different ways in which community is not just understood, but actively used. And we see that a lot in government use of what community should be. I also love this idea that we can use community to smuggle in radical ideas. And I think that speaks to some of Pete's earlier points about how do we balance notions of inclusion while also seeking to challenge power. And finally, that community is really best understood as a doing. And I think that's a very active way of looking at community in that way. So, time for some questions for Mark.
Thank you. Do you read Private Eye? They have a buzzword bingo community thing where there's the, the energy company community, there's the, and I always say to people, well, the Ku Klux Klan was a community. Comes back to this question, doesn't it, of local initiatives, whether they're funded by government or not, can be used as a fig leaf and as an excuse and as a step back from actual government. But then within these local groups, there is usually a tension, in my experience, between the thoroughgoing radicals who understand the game that is being played and the others who are other people who are either less well read on their Gramsci or naive, who are quite flattered 6 months into the project to be invited to sit on such and such a panel or to get a little bit of funding towards doing some research for X and Y. And so we're going to be struggling with this over the next 6 months in what I'm doing. I'm already aware that we're going to be attracting some of these people who are either naive or opportunistic. And so have you ever seen or can you imagine ways that a community of activists who are doing something genuinely radical, smuggling in these things, could sit down and have a proper series of carbon conversations that said, right, how do we respond when they come knocking? How do we have, do we let the people who need the money or who are thrilled to be on a panel go and do that as long as they don't use our name? Or do we have a blanket, no, once you start doing that, you are no longer part of our community, you have to choose. Do you know of anyone who's done that? And if you do you have their email? Because I want to do this right. I don't want, in a year's time, I don't want to be having factional disputes saying, you sell out, you sold out, and that person saying to me, well, you never said that I couldn't go and sit on that panel or get that money from the council. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think likewise, through your first statement back, there's a lot in that question and what you pick on to respond to. I remember from the Occupy movement, the one outside St Paul's first started, and people were saying, well, some of these people aren't real activists, they're just they go to Starbucks and whatever, and somehow that delegitimized them actually being there. And I think people are involved in these groups, any group, for a whole multitude of different reasons, and that doesn't in any way detract from why they're there. So that'll be the first thing to say. The second thing about branding and selling out of people misusing your the name that originally started as something quite in one way and then ended up another, and you only have to look at the number of Quaker companies that were set up in Britain and see what they now do to kind of realise that that's a very real thing. I think it comes back to this perennial tension between what I've heard described as the prophet and the priest. And within any institution or group, you have certain people who are the priestly figures who seek to curate and to keep going and to sustain that institution or group. And then you have the more prophetic types whose kind of role is always to step outside and to kind of show a mirror up and say, do you know what you guys are doing? You originally said you'd be doing this, and now look at you. And you probably need both of those, actually. And it's where you're best suited. Are you more of a priest or are you more of a prophet? I don't know. Yeah.
Someone said stormtrooper.
it's been described in other different ways, but this is one of the ways in which I've heard it described before. Is sustaining and curating institutions. And some people's impulse is always to say, well, let's do a new thing. I'm fed up with the opportunities that we've got. Let's do a new thing. And you probably need both.
Very quickly. The last time we did this, one of the people ended up as a councillor on Manchester City Council. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We need allies within the system, but we also need not to get ripped off.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's probably slightly different to what I was saying then, yeah, because that's quite, yeah, we can be very critical of that. Yeah.
So, can you share with us difficulties you come across of your community project, or any difficulties?
Yeah, sure, loads. How long have you got? Loads. Well, I mean, so I don't live in Edinburgh, and I never have, and it's not so much my project, but I was kind of going in and like doing research, working with these guys. One of the main frustrations a lot of these guys had was around the Clean Air Act. So Edinburgh's has a lot of legislation around pretty buildings and things. So real minimal change that would be required. Even things around insulating homes are just completely outlawed. So there was real difficulty getting quite minor local council laws changed around some of the most basic energy efficiency measures. I think that would be the #1 frustration for a lot of the people in these groups. Never mind, solar panels or more ambitious stuff. Just in terms of retrofitting the built environment. Yeah, I think they have loads of frustrations. I think that's almost par for the course. I don't want to say that, but it seems to be. It's really not. Yeah. But yeah, I could talk to you for an hour at lunch about the number of problems they face.
Got Pete.
Not a lot, it's something else.
Okay.
I was just going to follow on, and it will bring in an issue about problems with community group and the sort of things that have. The issue there about getting groups involved in that, almost the way in which governance might co-opt groups for co-production, if you like, without the groups even really understanding or realising that, and sorts of problematics of that. I know in Transition Nottingham, Brian will probably agree that we did have a lot of debates originally about how much should we involve the local government, and shouldn't we really just be getting the local government to work for us rather than us working for the local government. But I didn't want to use necessarily, I wanted to move away slightly from the Transition Towns example at the moment, and just talk about something that's going on in Nottingham at the moment. We have an eco house that we're trying to put together, which is a very DIY. We've got a terrace that the council have given us, I confess, on a peppercorn seed. They're not putting any specifications really on what we can do in there, but the restraints on what we can do are very much limited to our funds. And of course, in order to get funds to do something with that house, we could easily go to one of the major energy companies and use their community funding. However, a lot of the people who are activists working with us are saying, oh no, we're not going to get involved with those. No, we mustn't. So we're almost at this kind of hiatus, and it's exactly what you were saying, Mark, is how do you get over that? And at what point do you have those conversations, and at what point do you ever resolve them? I'm not sure you ever can.
Yeah.
So.